Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Why hasn't the comic book industry grown in the last 30 years? And the answer to that question is the comic book industry is its own worst enemy. Now, back in the 1980s, comic book editors like Jeanette Kahn, who ran DC Comics, and Jim Shooter, who ran Marvel, basically had the comic book industry set on a course where it could be competitive with the traditional publishing industry. And they established standards that were similar to that of the publishing industry, making sure that there were deadlines that were met for books to be turned in by writers and artists on time, and made sure that content was able to get to the printers and the distributors in order for it to be on sale on the dates they were supposed to arrive. And with those people in charge at editorial at both Marvel and DC, who were known as the Big Two, both Marvel and DC and many other independents like First Comics, Now Comics, and many other publishers basically led to the expansion of the comic book industry. And as the 1980s went on, the industry basically was growing, and again growing at an exceptional rate. Unfortunately, what happened was people behind the scenes basically started to get in their own way, and as they got in their own way, they basically undermined the entire progress of the comic book industry. Now, what happened, according to some speculators, is that Marvel basically got taken off its road of success back in about 1987 when an artist, John Byrne, allegedly held a party to burn Jim Shooter in effigy along with his new Universe comics. And with this burning of Jim Shooter in effigy, the editor-in-chief at Marvel, this got to corporate heads, and those corporate heads wound up terminating Jim Shooter from his position as editor-in-chief. And as they got Jim Shooter terminated as editor-in-chief, many comic artists and many comic writers thought they had gone out here and eliminated somebody who they thought was a threat to their own workplace. However, they didn't see how they were doing damage to the overall business of the comic book industry. And what happened over at Marvel is after Jim Shooter was terminated, what happened over at Marvel is that Marvel's whole direction went in a bad road. Now, Tom DeFalco did his best to try to maintain course. However, as time went on, and while the comic book industry was continuing to grow with the success of many of the creative teams that Jim Shooter had basically established for many of their books and established an editorial standard for business, Marvel was able to continue to grow as related to the framework and structure he established, and was able to grow because he established that framework and structure for deadlines, for standards as related to art and quality of art, and making sure that you got top creative teams on books in order to generate buzz and sales. Unfortunately, after a couple of years, what happened over at Marvel is that without Jim Shooter being able to guide Marvel, Marvel basically wound up losing its direction, I believe right in the early 90s, as creators like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, and Rob Liefeld were thinking about moving away from Marvel, and looking to move away from Marvel because of the stringent standards that Jim Shooter had established for characters and story. And what they didn't see was how this was basically the industry being on a road to a state of decline that started very slowly with the termination of Jim Shooter at Marvel, and Marvel's editors really not understanding how the publishing business worked. And as they didn't understand how the publishing business worked, they basically let go of three of their top talents in Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane, who were basically big draws at Marvel at the time. Again, these were the guys who led to the million copy sales of books like X-Men #1, Spider-Man #1, and X-Force #1. And without those top draw celebrity artists, as they would call them, or rock star artists, there was nobody there to incentivize the readers to continue going out to buy comics, especially those people who were a part of the growing speculator market. And without anybody there to, again, drive the sales as related to creative teams, Marvel basically didn't have that editor, again, to navigate the ship as related to hiring talent, nor did they have the person to, again, be able to be that draw that would get people in to have to build the buzz and anticipation for the books. And as Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane went to form Image Comics to get more creative control over stories, this left Marvel to be a rudderless ship. And again, a rudderless ship that was basically made rudderless because they got rid of Jim Shooter. And again, getting rid of Jim Shooter may have sated the feelings of many comic creators in the 80s, but it basically set the entire industry off course in the 90s because Marvel, again, was the big draw for much of the business as related to comic book sales at comic shops where most comics were sold, and they were a big draw at the bodegas, grocery stores, newsstands, and places where comic books were sold. But sadly, many in the industry, again, didn't understand the business structure of the comic book industry, and they basically looked to dismantle it to try to create something new. And as time went on and we went out, and again, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane left to form Image Comics, Marvel basically looked to try to change its overall business model and tried to change its business model as it was basically dealing with an issue as related to their creative teams because they lost their superstar artists, and as they lost their superstar artists, they lost their draws as related to bringing in sales, because in the publishing business, when you have a imprint, you have several authors, and again, when trade publishing, you want to have your big draw authors. These are the people who are going to make the money on the 10% of books that will pay for the 90. And again, a lot of people in the comic book industry didn't understand how things work. They didn't understand you need to have your guys who are your front list, creative teams out there selling the books to cover the losses on the books that you launched that do not sell. But sadly, Marvel was launching a lot of books, and at one time they had over 179 titles. And again, 179 titles is a bloated catalog, because usually back in the mid-80s, Shooter had the catalog at about 16 books. And again, 16 was easy to navigate, and the customer could afford to pick up all the books if they wanted. And again, there were other lines like the Star line and other licensed books, but the core Marvel Universe books were, again, just 16 to 17 titles. But these new people came in, put in over 179 titles. Moreover, the editorial basically changed from being run by one editor-in-chief who had the final say over what was published to committees of editors. And as we went into committees of editors on different teams of books like the Spider-Man team, the X-Men team, and the Marvel Heroes team, this made it where many of the comics being published were not of good quality. And again, not of good quality because there was no one consistent standard as related to things like house style, or things like standards for continuity or standards for stories. And by about 1994, late 1994 to 1995, there was a significant change in the quality of books as related to the over-focus on gimmicks to basically everything being extreme. And everything being extreme basically put Marvel on a road where their books' quality basically dropped. And as the quality dropped, they decided to further expand their business without having the elements that you would need to expand a business. They decided to expand into distribution by purchasing Heroes World. Now, Marvel basically thought buying Heroes World would get them more control over the comic book market, and by having a distributor, they'd be able to control how they could get the books out and basically be able to make more money. Unfortunately, what they didn't understand about the publishing business they didn't understand about the publishing business is that when it comes to publishing, you have to have returns. And again, as they went out to buy Heroes World, they wanted to possibly make these books non-returnable, and that alienated many of the retailers, like the grocery stores, the drugstores, the bodegas, the supermarkets, and many of the retailers out here, because when retail, you need returnability. And comics, basically, after Marvel bought Heroes World, lost the venues like the drugstores, the supermarkets, the grocery stores, the bodegas, and the places where casual people picked up comics. And sadly, after they lost that, they lost a big chunk of the market share. And as they lost a huge chunk of market share, this is what further exacerbated the decline of comics, because many of these people in editorial, again, did not understand the publishing business and didn't understand how returnability impacts the business. Because if you want to, again, reach that larger audience, you need to be able to incentivize retailers. And the only way retailers are incentivized is if there is returnability. If there's returnability, there that you will be able to access larger retailers, and again, those retailers will have an incentive to put your products on the shelf, because they know at the end of 30 days what they can do is go out and return those items for store credit. Moreover, you get an indicator of what is actually selling and be able to understand what sells. But Marvel basically, again, wanted to walk away from that type of distribution, thinking they could make more money, but took more losses. And this basically put Marvel on a road to bankruptcy, because, again, many of the creatives thought they could understand the business, but didn't understand the business the way Jim Shooter did, because Jim Shooter worked under Mort Weisinger, who worked at DC Comics as the editor-in-chief. And as he worked at the side of Mort Weisinger, and again learned the not only the craft of comic storytelling at a young age, he learned the business of publishing. And again, the industry, which was mad at Jim Shooter for establishing standards, basically became its own worst enemy. And as it became its own worst enemy, it basically led to the decline of comics. And again, many of the creatives basically, again, work against themselves because they don't want to swallow their pride and admit they don't know anything about the business of publishing. Now, the same thing happened over at DC Comics when Jeanette Kahn decided to step down after over 2 decades of, again, just excellent work of navigating DC Comics through the decline of the comic book industry. And around 2001, she decided to step down, and they had a guy who was, again, another guy who was there, but instead of picking that man who had publishing experience, they got Dan Didio, thinking they could expand with a guy with a Hollywood perspective. But sadly, Dan Didio didn't have any understanding of how the publishing business worked, and as a result, he basically wound up messing up DC Comics, which was doing well under Paul Levitz. Paul Levitz, again, had DC running right, but the whole thing was, again, they decided they wanted to expand and hoping to get a Hollywood executive into the business. But this man had no publishing experience, and again, became another own worst enemy of the business. And again, that led to the decline of DC Comics over the 2000s and the 2010s. And at this point, the comic book industry basically is further become on a state of decline. And it's mainly because many of the creators in the business are their own worst enemy. Many of the creators are their own worst enemies. And instead of looking to defer to someone who has more experience or an understanding of business, what they do is go out here and make policies based on emotion, or go out here and make stories on emotion, never ever assessing how that's going to impact the business. No, and that's why the comic book industry, instead of growing to that next level that Jim Shooter basically set the course for, I mean, under Jim Shooter's leadership, comic books became mainstream and were basically, again, selling those huge numbers because he knew how to, one, go out here and hire talent, two, he knew how to assign talent to books, and knew how to build buzz. And 3, he knew how to go out here and basically, again, let the characters sell the books. And he basically, again, establishing those standards, had Marvel running like a machine to the point where even 3 years after he was let go, had Marvel to the point where it became a mainstream company that had its own stock and its own thing and was doing very well. And the only thing that led it to it, again, falling apart was because artists like John Byrne, again, could not stand, again, being under standards and under structure. And again, his burning Jim Shooter in effigy basically set the fire that burned down the comic book industry. That, and again, many of the top artists leaving for Image Comics basically just tanked Marvel because they had no plan on trying to find replacement talent, because Shooter also, as the editor-in-chief who had the final say, knew how to recruit talent, knew how to recruit people. That was shown by the success of Valiant after he left Marvel, which basically fell apart after he left, and even with his own company, Defiant, which did very well until Marvel sued him. Again, showing how many in the industry are their own worst enemy and undermine their own success. And that has many people scratching their head. Why can't the comic book industry do better? Well, the comic book industry can't do better because many of the creators out here basically are their own worst enemy and basically work against themselves. And they work against themselves and undermine their own success because they don't know when to step out of their own way. When it comes to many comic pros these days, they basically don't know how to step out of their own way and just let things flow. When it comes to success, when you see success coming, sometimes you just gotta, 1, keep your mouth shut, 2, you gotta know how to just let things flow and let people just build up that buzz and generate that heat. And again, this has been a problem with many comic creators. They get on social media and they start getting into beefs and arguments instead of focusing on business, or they start participating in whisper networks talking down people who could possibly help them with their business, again, alienating people. And this is what's been happening to the comic book industry, which basically, again, has become its, and still is its own worst enemy. I mean, comics could be as big as manga had people just got out their own way, could be still big out here and still be sold in retailers like grocery stores, still sold in places like drugstores, and basically getting access to a new generation of customers. But many comic pros basically get in their own way, and as they get in their own way, they hurt their own business, like the way we lost an entire generation of readers. We lost an entire generation of readers when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was out at its peak. I mean, here was an opportunity to reach millions of young customers, but instead of having books that featured the characters in the movies, Marvel Studios and Marvel Comics could not synergize because Marvel publishers were out here selling token diversity characters as part of its all different Marvel, instead of introducing new readers to Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Bruce Banner, and Peter Parker. No, these people basically thought their new token diversity versions would be the ones that would be the next generation of readers would be into, but those characters never got any foot traffic because they never drove people to the comic stores. Moreover, many of the comic publishers did nothing to drive people to the comic shop. Again, comic book industry pros have been their own worst enemy for many years. Comic editorial has been its own worst enemy for many years. And again, being your own worst enemy, you undermine yourself, you sabotage yourself, and that's why the comic book industry is in the sad state of affairs that it's in, because many people in the business are their own worst enemy, and again, don't understand the principles of business, don't understand the principles of again, basic things like keeping your mouth shut as related to social media and selling your product. This is something I see all the time. People would rather get in their feelings about Donald Trump rather than saying, hey, my new book is out on a such and such date, and I would love to see you at the shop, or do a live stream saying, hey, I'm giving away an autograph copy. I mean, things that could, again, make a person's day and get them excited about the book, build up the buzz. These people don't do. No, what they do is go out here going into back and forths. Even some of the indie creators out here on these crowdfunding platforms, they go into back and forths instead of looking to, again, let people know about when their book's coming out, or let people know what time the book is coming out so that people can put in their pledges, put in their money. Again, this is a sales business and your job is to sell. But many people, again, get caught up in junior high gossip and junior high drama, to not think about business, and as they get personal, this is why the industry's sales are at an all-time low, and again, why we have less than 300 comic shops, because so many comic shops suffered so many losses, because many people in the industry are their own worst enemy, and they've driven away the core customers, which are the young kids. Again, driven all those people away because many of these people, again, they've grown old and they haven't grown up. And as they haven't grown up, they've basically made the comic book business one that instead of expanding and growing has become a business that's basically on its way out because the people in it don't see how everything they're doing is sabotaging the business and can't see how they, as their own worst enemy, have basically led to the demise of a business that brought joy to generations before. Now, if you want to check out my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic over at lulu.com for the same price it was on the 2022 Kickstarter, and you can pick up that comic on print on demand. And if you want to check out my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, it's available on Kindle right now for 99 cents, and you can pick up a paper copy in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past, which is on Amazon.com, along with the other books in the SJS Direct universe, such as those in the ISIS series, those in the Esteem series, those in the John Haynes series, my Goth Spinsterella trilogy, Spellbound, The Legendary Mad Matilda and Spinsterella, and the upcoming Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer, and books like The Thetas, A Recipe for Success, and Eternal Night. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to see me make more videos taking the comic book industry to the barbecue, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback at e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.